Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am delighted to welcome you all to the 22nd edition of the World Sustainable Development Summit. Before we commence the session today, I would request you all to put your phones on silent mode. My name is Mitaksha, and I will be emceeing this session on financing sustainable development and climate actions for realizing the 2030 Agenda. With this, I would like to invite Dr. Vibha Dhawan, Director General TERI, to deliver her welcome address.
Thank you so much. And welcome once again. In fact, I have spoken in the morning as well, but a little more about this particular session. Now, according to the latest Financing for Sustainable Development report, the world has seen some positive developments as far as in green energy finance is concerned. However, other areas such as climate adaptation, sustainable consumption and production, biodiversity and ecosystem integrity, pollution abatement perhaps need much greater attention. On the theme of the summit, mainstreaming sustainable development and climate resilience for collective action, one of the policy innovations can be green budgeting, a model which has been implemented in one of the states which perhaps you'll find hard to believe, Bihar. Green budgeting is a tool involving of budgetary planning that can help in systematic mapping and tracking the sources of funds, outlays, expenditure, and policies. This, in turn, can support coordinated policy designs and identification of periodic and continuous finance needs for achieving green objectives, that is, those related to the climate and environmental dimensions. TERI has launched a portal on green budgeting, which is meant to be a resource to provide guidance on green budgeting. The portal and toolkit can be used by government officials, including officials in charge of budget cells, research and academia, civil society, and any other stakeholders who wish to engage on this policy innovation. I'm sure that discussions in this session will help us better understand the innovative financial instruments and mechanisms across sectors as we work towards realizing the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. So look forward to deliberations in this session, and thank you all the panelists to be with us. Thank you once again.
She would announce.
Thank you, ma'am. Moving forward, this session will be chaired by Mr. Manish Bapna, President and Chief Executive Officer, Natural Resources Defense Council. I now invite Mr. Manish Bapna to share the chair remarks and conduct the proceedings for the session. Thank you, sir.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Good morning once again. This is going to be an incredibly important conversation. Financing sustainable development and climate action for realizing the 2030 Agenda. We know that finance is at the very heart of advancing the Sustainable Development Goals for tackling the climate challenge, and to do so in ways that promote low-carbon resilient growth. We also know that the current global financial architecture is not set up to solve today's problems. The financial architecture we have in place today has been set up in a very different world, a post-World War II world. And the fundamental question is, can we actually shift, change, transform the global financial system to meet today's challenges? That's what we're going to talk about in today's session. What would it take to do that? What are some of the specific actions we can take to transform the financial system to meet the challenges that face the planet today? And this is a particularly important year for us to be having these conversations. Over the course of 2023, there's going to be at least 4 major moments when the international community will be coming together to talk about this issue. In June, Barbados and France, as some of you may know, are hosting the new Financial Pact. It's an effort to advance something called the Bridgetown Initiative, which was a set of reforms put forward by Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados that would begin to change how the Bretton Woods institutions operate, how the global community operates to deal with the sustainability and development challenges today. That would be taking place in Paris in June. In September, India will be hosting the G20, as you all know well, the Green Development Pact. Finance is going to be a critical part of that conversation. In October, the World Bank will be hosting its annual meetings with the IMF in Morocco. And this annual meeting is going to be particularly important because we're going to see a new president for the World Bank that we hope will embrace a bolder, more ambitious vision for what the World Bank and the multilateral development banking system more broadly can do to unlock finance at scale to tackle global public goods. And then the UAE will be prioritizing international finance and how it pertains to fragile and low-income countries at the COP in November. So this is a really important moment for this conversation, and each of the distinguished panelists here brings a different perspective, but an incredibly important perspective to the conversation. When we think about the finance challenge, it's important to think about it like a jigsaw puzzle. Everyone in this panel and in general has a particular piece of the puzzle that we have to get right. But to transform the system, we also need to think hard about how the pieces interlock with each other, how that actually creates the full picture of the scale of the transformation we need in the financial system. So my hope today is not only will we hear a little bit about how these different pieces of the global financial puzzle, what they are, but how they can be put together to create the transformation we need to see. We have a terrific panel. I'm not going to actually go through their long bios. That would take much of the hour, but I will just give their headline current kind of assignment. And let me start by welcoming Mr. Laszlo Boberli, State Councillor to the Prime Minister of Romania, to give the ministerial address. What we're going to do, each one will have about 6 minutes, an initial set of comments, then we're going to try to create a little bit of time for a discussion before we close with an epiphany from each of the panelists to all of you. So with that, let me turn it over. State Councillor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam General Director, it's a privilege and an honor for me to be here, and I would like to congratulate our hosts that they are able to invite and to be here so many personalities in sustainable development. And I have to tell you that each of us could become, or we are, leaders of sustainability. It depends on us. I am in charge in the Romanian government to implement Agenda 2030, a very easy task. No, it's not easy, but you need some parts of sustainability to do it. First, we need a vision. Without vision, we can spend a lot of money, but we need a vision. We need interinstitutional framework to put in place what we intend to do. Thirdly, we need leaders. Without leaders, we cannot, and you see also in political life, it's an impression of me, we need more leaders in political life to solve this issue. And everything around us is about sustainability, everything. And of course, we need partnership. It's a global issue. It's a menu for us. How we can use, because 2015 was a milestone, in my opinion, in the humanity recent era, because it was, Mr. Bapna mentioned about 3 important documents. It was also in Sendai how the natural disasters, and we saw this tragic earthquake in Syria and Turkey. And of course, we have now tornado in Romania. Yes? That's what we miss, a tornado in Romania. So it's about partnership. And European Union, because we are part of European Union, of course, Romania, they are doing a lot regarding financing, multilateral financing. We have this official development assistance. I have to tell you that in 2021, European Union gave almost 70 billion euro of this ODA, which means about 45% of global assistance. It's a lot of money. And we intend to have, now we have about 0.49% of GNI, but we intend to have until 0.7 from our GNI until 2030. So we are doing a lot of this. But regarding Romania, because I had some experience, I was the president of the last CSD 19. On that time, I was Minister for Environment in Romania. And after that, I realized that we have to establish a framework. We have political willingness. We were the first parliament from interparliamentary union that we have a very strong political declaration. We want to implement. Second, we established in 2017 a department near the Prime Minister's office. We have the government, an interdepartmental committee, which is the government, because you need also leadership. It's headed by the Prime Minister. We have a consultative council, which is the wise people of the sustainability from academic area. So we are working with them. We finalized 99 indicators. In this moment, we have to analyze and we have to make an inventory because it's midterm of Agenda 2030, and we have to have an inventory in which stage we are. Without indicators, you cannot monitor this issue. And, of course, we have the civil society. Without a very clear message and to have a partnership with civil society, you will fail. So we have more than 120 bodies in this coalition of civil society. So we put in place, and of course, we have to prepare our budgets based on sustainable investments. And it will be the first year for Romania to have this kind of budget, I hope. It depends on politicians also, of course. But in this moment, I hope that we are a regional hub in this part of Europe. We received, we are very proud, the big award of United Nations in Dubai last year. Why? First, because the efficiency of implementing Agenda 2030, and secondly, because of innovative tools. And what is the most important in this picture of sustainability? The human being and education. And that's why we have a new job in Romania, expert in sustainable development, and we will train 2,000 experts until 2026. We have a financial background from our recovery plan. It's important because we need a network. What Jeffrey Sachs say more time about network. We need network. We need people around us who understand what is sustainability and they put in place. So in this moment, in my opinion, and we will have a center of excellence regarding a platform for everybody to know. We need a critical mass in our society. and a positive energy. And we need to talk with people. We need smaller or bigger communities to understand more. And each of them, they are talented people. They are for sustainability, but they have to have the occasion to be partners. So I will finalize, it's a Rubik Cube. You know this Rubik Cube. With the 17 SDGs is one of our brand. The second brand is my tie, you see, this sustainable tie. And it's like our life. If the pieces are not in their places, we have a problem with our life, yes? We had to put our Rubik Cube, each individual community, smaller or bigger, in their place. And if we put it them, we will have a more sustainable world, a more engagement for us, and to say that we are doing a lot for the next generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Incredibly, not only for the Rubik's Cube and the tie, but also for the explaining how important it is in integrating and mainstreaming sustainable development into how governments work, into the institutional infrastructure of how governments work, which is at the heart of actually mainstreaming this agenda. Let me turn next to Pradeep Tarakan, the regional advisor for South Asia at the Asian Development Bank, to share a perspective from the ADB. Pradeep.
Thanks so much. That is a hard act to follow, but I will try to do my best. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the opportunity for the Asian Development Bank to speak at this summit. As we all know, while the 2030 agenda is aligned over the 5 Ps, the so-called 5 Ps, allow me today to focus on the perspective of the planet and then on the lens of the energy transition. When it comes to the energy transition, ADB is really focused on 3 things, and the chair had alluded to some of them earlier. First, we want to make more capital available to support the transition. And 2, we want to make sure that everything we do is Paris aligned. And 3, we want to employ new financing approaches and models to solve what we call our difficult areas or emerging challenges. First, at COP26, we announced our ambition to provide $100 billion in cumulative finance between 2019 and 2030 for our clients in the Asia Pacific. $100 billion. That's a lot of money for ADB, but it is a fraction of what the region needs. So we are going to try and be as strategic as possible and leverage other partners as well. About 2/3 of these funds are to be dedicated for mitigation actions and 1/3 for adaptation. ADB has been an active partner. We don't work alone. We work with all the major climate funds like the Green Climate Fund, the Climate Investment Funds, and several other philanthropies. We are in the process of signing agreements with global philanthropies to support our work in the region, including the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. On top of that, we're also in the process of setting up an innovative structure, what we're calling the Finance Facility for Climate in Asia and Pacific, or IFCAP. So what IFCAP is going to do is to utilize guarantees and grants from our shareholders, from our donor countries and philanthropies to leverage unprecedented new levels. So this is how we are trying to tap into our existing reserves while also coming up with new ways of increasing the availability of capital for our clients in the country. And as I said, we also want to make sure that whatever we do is Paris aligned. So ADB is committed to achieving full alignment of its sovereign energy operations, sovereign operations by 1st of July, 2023, and aligning all of our non-sovereign operations or our private sector operations to about 85% by 1st of July this year and 100% by 1st of July 2025. Now let me tell you about a few financing models and approaches that we are experimenting with in, as I called them earlier, the difficult or emerging areas. One is coal-fired power plants. They're a particularly vexing problem, right? These long-lived assets represent a significant portion of the greenhouse gas emissions from the power sector in countries in the region. And in many parts of Asia, these plants operate under long-term power purchase agreements or power purchase contracts or PPAs, which means that not only will they operate for decades into the future, they're going to prevent the uptake of cleaner renewable energy options. So ADB is developing a blended finance approach, what we call the Energy Transition Mechanism, or ETM for short, to accelerate the retirement of coal-fired power plants and support the transition to sources of sustainable and clean energy. We are piloting this in select Southeast Asian countries. So at Indonesia's G20 presidency, the Leaders Summit last year, ADB signed the first MOU with a private coal-fired power plant operator in Indonesia to provide financing for retiring that plant early and repurposing it to provide renewable energy generation and a combination of grid services. We're also supporting countries with climate policies because we realize when we talk about climate action, it's not just about projects, it's also about enabling policies, and they need to work in tandem. So in 2022, we approved the first climate change policy loan to the Philippines and a sector development program in Cambodia. So a sector development program includes a combination of policies. So we support the government to put in place an enabling environment, while we also support what we call pioneering or keystone projects. In this case, we supported the country's first grid-based energy storage facility and energy efficiency programs. While we pursue the transition, though, we are also committed to ensuring the benefits of this shift to low-carbon resilient economies are shared equally. We don't want to see an energy transition divide. And we don't want to leave any community, individual, or region behind. And to do this, ADB launched a Just Transition Support Platform at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. ADB, like many other MDBs, has signed on to a Just Transition high-level principles to articulate what we see as a common understanding of just transition and to guide our operations. So the platform that we set up is an effort to translate those high-level principles into concrete support that is consistent with our priorities, mandates, and our operating methods. So in closing, let me end by saying that ADB recognizes the tremendous challenge that we're all faced with, and we look forward to working with each of you to further these efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pradeep. The Asian Development Bank has been actually quite a leader on some of these energy transition issues, and yet we're going to need even more from the multilateral development banking system. So very much appreciate your thoughts on that. Next, delighted to invite Amit Pruthi, Director General for the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI, incredibly important international organization working to promote DRR in India and around the world.
Thanks, Manish. Thank you to TERI for inviting me today. I was just reflecting on what I was already hearing, and I'm not going to repeat some of the things that have been said, but a couple of things that really resonated well with me. I love the Rubik's Cube example. I think we are all looking at a challenge from a variety of perspectives, and it's really important to be able to put those together. I think that putting those together is partly what we have been missing. We've all been very, very focused in our disciplines and unable to actually break boundaries between different disciplines to actually see what the problem needs from that Rubik's Cube multiple perspective. So I represent a very, very new organization. I think most of you here may not even have heard of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, but it's a really up-and-coming organization with a lot of political backing. The Prime Minister of India launched CDRI in 2019 at the Climate Summit at the UN. And we've been in existence for about 2 years. We are a coalition. So again, about partnerships, we are a coalition of, at this point, 31 member countries and 8 international organizations. Pradeep may not know this, but ADB is actually part of the coalition as well. Okay, great. And why is that important? I think when we look at the challenges that we are faced with, and these challenges, I'll focus more on the disaster side. Just sitting in Delhi for the last couple of days, if you've had a chance to experience the weather, you can start to feel it's been a bit different. I woke up day before yesterday, or my 13-year-old daughter gets up and says, I couldn't sleep at night. And I'm like, why? because it was too hot. We're not used to the temperature changing. Now, that's not just unique to this year. Last year was one of the warmest, last year was the warmest March, and we are seeing these already. And I think the reason I'm articulating that is the 1.1 degree, the 1.5 ambition that we had all set, I think we are probably going to nod our heads in this room one way or the other, where I say we're not going to meet that. We are already way past the point of 1.5, right? Which means the challenges that we were starting to think about, and I'm talking about the adaptation narrative now. We're talking about things are changing at a much faster pace than we've been expecting them to change, which means the urgency for us to do something is even more important. And it's got a direct relationship to finance. So I come from the infrastructure side. Disaster, we're looking at how do you secure infrastructure for the future. It's the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. And when you're talking about the amount of infrastructure that we need to build across the world, India needs to build 20 new bomb bays to accommodate the urban expansion in the next 20 years. You look around the world, the amount of money that is needed in the infrastructure space is incredibly important. There's also now studies that are talking about, when you invest $1 in what is called resilient infrastructure, the returns are actually equivalent to 4 times that. So we need to think a lot more about resiliency. Why? Because if you start looking at what's already happening, Turkey is a very recent example. You go to Odisha in India in 2019, Cyclone Fani resulted in a loss of $9 billion in economic activity, including about $1 billion plus in infrastructure losses. So on one side, we have to build infrastructure. On the other side, the infrastructure that we're building is actually getting impacted a lot by natural hazards and the changing climate. So what are we doing as a coalition? We're really trying to do, we are new, we're not that big, but we have a lot of political support. So we're trying to see how can we influence at an upstream place the narrative around resilient infrastructure. So on one side, we're trying to build the evidence for it. On the other side, we're trying to see how do we help countries actually come up with projects that can be financed, that are resilient infrastructure finance related. An example there, at COP27, we launched a call for proposals for all small island development states. This was announced by the Prime Minister in the 2026, in the 26 COP26, and then COP27, we launched the call for proposals. Call for proposals ended on the 15th of February, and we have already 29 countries expressing an interest to do something in this space. So there's a lot of interest to do something in this space, and we are, in our own way, trying to see what we can do to support the most urgent needs. We launched a $50 million trust fund to help with that, focused primarily for technical assistance and capacity building. Going back to the minister's point, we need to understand the problem better. So for that, what we're trying to do is what do we do to train the next generation? I'll make a ageist comment here. People with my generation with gray hair, a lot of us maybe on the stage, we have caused this problem. But we need to get the next generation to really help to understand, not look at it from a disciplinary point of view, not look at it the way we've been looking at, but actually bring fresh perspectives. So we're in the process of launching academic partnership, a network of partners from the 31 member countries. Because again, if you look around the world, there are a lot of people innovating education, new education is coming up. So how do we use the coalition to bring that from one part of the other, of the world to the other? The importance, again, we are at a pivotal moment. The globe is already 1.1 degrees warmer, and it is unlikely that we'll meet the 1.5 target. With over half of the infrastructure required by 2050 yet to be built, we are really presented with an opportunity to look at resilience rather than locking in risk for the future. At this moment, and I think it has already been mentioned, the importance of international cooperation cannot be taken lightly. Already under India's presidency, the G20 countries have agreed to take a closer look at DRR. And one of the key objectives of this year's G20 DRR working group is to seek agreement towards making infrastructure systems disaster and climate resilient. In that same spirit of cooperation, I think this forum itself is incredibly important. So I'm looking forward to the continued discussions, and thank you for having me here. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit. That point about how we integrate resilience and not lock in risk was a powerful kind of vision, or kind of for us to be thinking about. Next, I'd like to invite Mahendra Singhi, CEO of Dalmia Cement, for the next set of remarks.
Happy green morning, leaders of sustainability and climate. My heartiest thanks to TERI for organizing the 22nd Sustainable Summit in a grand way, and that too in person. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great opportunity. The summit is a great opportunity to share thoughts, get ideas, and implement something. We do know that finance is an integral part of achieving our sustainability development goal by 2030, as well to work on the road path for clean and net zero carbon, which everybody has set the target of 2040, 2050, 2060, 2070. Surely, finance would be playing a very important role, and if we just analyze in last 8 years after signing Paris Climate Agreement, how finance has played the role both in developed world and in developing world, in corporates and in individuals' lifestyle. Probably we may agree that finance has not been able to play major role, and in some ways it has become a stumbling block to carry out the actions to achieve the ambitions. And this is my personal view, and I'm not casting any remark on anyone or any country. But yes, the way the need is of financing for sustainable development goal as well as for climate change, it's a big need. It runs in trillions and trillions. But still, if we look at any year's account, we don't find that maybe 2%, 5%, 7% money has been allocated for financing such activities. What may be the reason? Reason may be that still we are not considering this as a climate crisis, climate calamity, or human calamity, which is happening day in, day out. It's not that countries or the corporates doesn't have finance the money. We are well aware that countries are spending huge money for financing wars, and at the same time also investing a lot of money to take care of the people in terms of problems of hurricane, cyclone, COVID, etc. But what's the reason that specific finance is not being allocated for particular SDGs, particular climate actions? And the reason may be maybe for some country, maybe for some corporate, that there is no specific strategy for the same to use the finance for achieving certain goal. There may not be a specific budget for that activity. And if there are these budgets or the strategies, then yes, things are improving, things are in a better way. And if we take example of our country, India, we find that in last few years, the way India has focused the way our country has started working on green growth, the way budget is being planned, the way strategies are being implemented, I think we are finding better results. And one of the outcomes of this strategy is that yes, in G20 countries, India is one of the best performers on various climate actions. So that shows clearly that budget, the strategy can play very, very important role. The way India is addressing its goals in various ways, like energy transition by having 500 gigawatt target for 2030 for renewable energy, creating hydrogen hubs and hydrogen availability by allocating different type of finance. I think it has started giving better hopes. There are many such initiatives which government has taken, which may help the countries, which may help corporates, which may help individuals to think that what we should do. In fact, this has been also the strategy of our company, Dalmia Cement, in which we started thinking how to organize finance and not to depend only on financial institutions, but can we also allocate our own funds to drive climate actions, to achieve certain sustainability development goals on our own, for our own area, for our own operations. I think, ladies and gentlemen, it has worked. Proudly today I can say that Dalmia Cement was one of the first manufacturing company in the world who could announce in 2018 its roadmap for not only net zero carbon, but carbon negative by 2040. We had announced certain levers which would be used to achieve that, including how finance would be organized, and that's happening to a larger extent. We could also motivate and show leadership to the cement world, and that has also helped in a commitment of more than 70% of the world cement capacity to target net zero carbon, concrete and cement by 2050. So the point is that the way we could, and many other corporates like Dalmia Cement in India and maybe outside India also, who could identify the climate crisis in time, who could identify the benefits out of it also, as well, who had worked for the larger purpose, I think they are benefited. But at the same time, how MDBs, financial institutions, banks can play important role, not only for the countries, but for the corporates also, but for the individuals also. We have heard, Pradeep ji, that yes, in what way Asian Development Bank is focusing, and I do appreciate the activities and the actions which Asian Development Bank is taking so as to support the organizations, private organizations also. But at the same time, if I look at Indian banks, Indian financial institutions, we don't find that spirit. It is business as usual. It is risk averse. And friends, you would all agree that if we have to experiment on new technologies, clean technologies, like carbon capture and utilization, like hydrogen, like electrification of heating process, or maybe on electric vehicles, etc., I think there is some risk. So what finance industry can do is to share the risk also, and what MDBs can do is to share the grant also, as well link the finances with actual performance. Until unless that is done, I don't see at certain level, beyond certain level, Indian corporates or the small industries will be able to adapt to clean technologies, to work on SDGs. My request is to the government also and to the corporate also and the MDBs and others also, that let there be mandate that for each country which they have like that zero carbon strategy, but for and each corporate, let there be a specific action plan for implementing SDGs and climate change. Let there be specific activities and budget for finance, and let that be monitored, because whatever gets measured, monitored, and reported, I think that would get results. So financial institutions can play a very important role in pushing the corporates also, smaller, bigger, that they have to work, because until and unless all are together, globe as such, country as such, will not be able to achieve sustainable development goals. My message to myself also and others also, finance is an important role, but at the same time, don't wait for outside finance. You can also manage your own finance also, because we are working for larger purpose. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I remember in 2018 when your company was one of the very first to make the carbon negative target by 2040 in a hard-to-abate sector. And that it came from the developing world was something that really shook up the international community. So thank you for your ambition.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to now invite Dr. Dhruba Purkayastha, Director of the India Climate Policy Initiative, to the stage, reflect on some of these issues. We then have a video address, and then we will have a few minutes for a brief discussion.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you, WSDS. Thank you, TERI, for inviting me to this very important global session. Thank you again. Being the last speaker is both often easy and hard. I will not try and repeat what has been said, and I'll take you straight to the agenda. I'll take you straight to financing climate action till 2030. What we heard in the morning from Manish Papna, clearly there is a huge gap in climate investments globally. As Climate Policy Initiative, we track that for the last 7 years, and we also see very clearly, you can find that in our global climate landscape. The order of magnitude required is somewhere around 2.5 to 3 trillion. What we reach barely is less than a trillion. And it is the same story that every other institution puts up. It is the same story in terms of, if you look at IRENA, if you look at IEA, in their respective areas, everywhere the same gap shows up, from MDBs to institutions saying this much of investment is required in mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, and this is what is flowing in. So herein lies the problem. If you look at net zero, electricity grid, decarbonizing electricity, decarbonizing hard-to-abate sectors, it's always the same story. In electricity, it is like, okay, we are investing about $800 billion to $1 trillion in renewable energy and plus the associated infrastructure, but the required investment is $4 trillion plus if we have to reach that by 2030, which is where the graph needs to bend, where the curve needs to bend. Now let's get to money. Is there, every COP, we see 1 trillion expansion, by the way, almost. I've been looking at it for the last 5-6 years, and it's like 1 trillion gets added in the required investment. This year around, it was something like 9 trillion. Now let me start with saying, is there money for climate action globally? Now let me give you a broad perspective. I would argue that there is enough money. Now there are various schools of thought which show around saying the world is an 80 trillion, 85 trillion economy. How do you manage to have 9 trillion investments in just climate? Investments in mitigation and adaptation. Well, it is possible. Let's understand that there is 200 trillion of investment sitting with the global capital markets over there. Some of them have joined GFINS, which is a global financial sector alliance created in Glasgow, of saying, committing to shift their capital allocation to renewable energy, to green, to climate. I'm just limiting to climate because I do understand that beyond climate, sustainable development goals, I'm not really drawing away from them. SDG financing also is significantly wider, but I'm limiting myself right now, climate mitigation adaptation. There is other environment part of it, which is air, water pollution, and all of it is still there, and then you extend beyond social sectors in terms of SDGs meeting. That order of magnitude is also about $5 trillion. Now let's look at that capital. What is happening? This capital needs to shift where? This capital needs to shift to renewable energy, to greener investments, to investment. Is there technology? Yes, there is. But is there scale? No, there isn't scale enough. How does costs of technology and application go down as economies of scale and scope play out? And that's what the world has seen in renewable energy. Now, what's happening here? The capital is remaining invested in OECD countries and non-climate sectors. So there are two shifts required. How does those two shifts happen? The two shifts required for global capital is to shift to emerging market developing countries, because that is where their growing energy consumption is growing. That is where those countries are developing, and away from OECD and into sectors away from fossil fuels into renewable energy. Now, I come to what Manish referred to as a change in global financial architecture. Now, I'll make just a few points here. While I do appreciate that in today's fragmented world, in terms of increasing protectionism, increasing energy security, well, energy security is a form of protectionism, imposing borders, but let's talk about the problem of climate as a global common and independent of what the geopolitics currently stands. I do appreciate that geopolitics is important, but let's look at solutions, let's look at transformative solutions, which was stated, and what are the issues? I was just listing down, there are 5 issues here. The cost of money is far higher in emerging markets than in OECD. IEA puts out very clearly it is 7x times higher. We worked on models which basically give you a range of cost of capital from 45% to 3% in an OECD country. With this range, where are the returns? Capital does not go because the capital gets priced according to risk. And if capital gets priced according to risk, the capital will seek higher returns of moment going to where the resource potential is high, where you will mitigate. Efficiency of mitigation will be higher in those countries, but it will stay invested in OECD. So we need this shift to happen. I'll come to it. The second most important point is the relying on the banking system versus capital markets. And I have an important point here to make. We rely on the banking system in most of the developing world, including India, which is significantly, when we track climate finance over here, we find significantly domestic, and I agree with Mahendraji that it can be financed domestically. But there is a rest of the world which needs global capital inflows, and they happen better not through banking, but through capital markets. And let's look at how green bonds have been doing. They've reached 2.5 trillion issuances. Now, therefore, I have to get the global international financial architecture has to get fungibility in capital markets because they are far easier than the regulatory aspects of each country's central banking and system. But capital markets, even if you look at India, very clearly there's huge FPI investments. So it needs to get capital market fungible, and it's possible. There is a small tweak here. The world needed credit ratings 100 years ago because there was huge information asymmetry and you could not get out. But let's understand that today, unless both MDBs, financial institutions, asset managers, asset owners, banks and insurance companies are trapped within the paradigm of credit ratings. And that is an institution that needs to change. I am expecting those changes to happen, but it's not that fast. Those institutions need to change and allow for capital allocation appropriately so the world is able to address. Otherwise, this is an institutional change required, factoring in climate issues, factoring in that. I think last but not the least, and talking of public finance. Now let's look at the problem. You have highly indebted countries who are not in a position to assume more fiscal, I would say fiscal profligacy. Now when this is a situation, is it possible? Now I'm trying to address, think aloud, and trying to address what Manish placed. In terms of a global architecture, is it possible? We worked on a paper which is called Debt for Climate Swaps. Is it possible to set up an institutional mechanism where this action of climate action is replaced in terms of swaps, in terms of investments which are made in climate, in terms of higher government indebtedness? And let's recognize, and this is what Amit was bringing into the table, of saying, while the mitigation problem is a global common for sure, the adaptation and resilience problem is often local, and it causes local problems and therefore needs local solutions and local financing. And how do we get local financing in a situation where, well, this is not about an India forum, it works for many large countries, there is a sub-sovereign aspect to it, but even if we were to take it, the fiscal position of government borrowings is not very good presently. There needs to be a mechanism where governments can borrow, and I see the role of possibility of IMF has created a RST, a trust where excess SDRs are being brought in to finance low-income countries as far as climate investments. I think that needs to be expanded. That's a major change. But what I want to bring to table is something of a broken record that I keep hearing, that Copenhagen $100 billion has never shown itself up. And it's true, it's never shown itself up. But the problem, I'm not too sure where the problem is. I heard ODA for sure, Honorable Minister for Romania made that point. But the whole issue is, I'll take you back to another Paris. It's a Paris Accord, and 15 was a Paris Agreement. With the Paris Accord, it was possible for the developed countries to allocate 0.7% of GDP. It has reached 0.45, 0.5. And we are talking of $100 billion per annum, which is way, way less than 0.5% of GDP. So where lies the problem? I'm not sure where the problem is. But then I would like to end here that there is a need for handling. There are two solutions always proposed: leverage public finance. And how do you do that? Then you are talking of blended finance. Where is the blended capital going to come from? And if the blended capital doesn't come in the manner, and we need to create a new global architecture, we might need to look back at how Bretton Woods institutions were created with a concept which never got called upon. It's callable capital. Yes, it is politics now. It does not require taxpayer sanction in a European country because you are using contingent liability here, if at all. It is possible to leverage and create a global risk mitigation mechanism, which is clearly world doesn't have it, and it is missing. So I'll end here, and I think I'm running short of time, if at all. I think the message that I have is this is a global common problem. And here, maybe a wrong word, but we need to socialize the cost of money. So cost of capital, cost of money. If that mitigation happens in Argentina or in Africa, it does not matter for a global good. There is an institutional mechanism required to socialize the cost of money. Thank you.
Thank you for the powerful address, sir. Now we may have the leadership address by Mr. Bard Vegar Soyel, Director General, Norwegian Agency for Development.
Ladies and gentlemen, the world is a success story. It just doesn't always look like that. But remember that we have behind us generations of fantastic progress. So let's look back. In 1950, 6 out of 10 people globally lived in extreme poverty. Through 2 or 3 generations later, after COVID, less than 10% did. Electrification and education used to be luxuries. Today, they are widespread. the number of women who die during pregnancy and birth has been reduced. And maybe most impressively, child mortality was halved in 2 decades. For a long time, all indicators on development were pointing in the right direction. But now, this seems to have turned. So what happened? Well, the downslide started some years ago, and with COVID, it accelerated. We saw an increase in extreme poverty for the first time in decades. And with that, backsliding on education, gender equality, child marriages, global health, and also other indicators. We also saw a global economic setback after the pandemic, with the divide between rich and poor countries deepening. Russia's brutal attack on Ukraine has also been an attack on developing countries, jeopardizing food security. Today, a record 360 million people are facing acute risk of hunger. And not to forget that the long-term development destroyer is, of course, climate change and the loss of nature. Climate change is already causing catastrophes and taking lives. And it is deeply unfair. Countries in the global south with hardly any emissions are by far the most vulnerable and have the least resources to adapt. So, in sum, we are now far from reaching the Sustainable Development Goals, and maybe further than we were a few years ago. This is also clear if you look at the numbers. We are, according to an analysis, $3,000 billion short of reaching the SDGs every year. A lot of this has to come from governments, but, and this is important, we cannot bridge the funding gaps for the SDGs by development assistance alone. Total global ODA is $180 million per year, which is a very small sum of money. Thus, we need to mobilize more public and private investments at a totally different scale than what we see today and in new ways. Development assistance can play a role as a catalyst for private capital. For example, by de-risking investments by using guarantee schemes, like we have opened for in our renewable energy grants. This is also an example of how we integrate development, climate, and nature in our work. And this is also absolutely crucial for reaching our goals. All work to fight poverty should also contribute to a greener future. And our work to cut emissions and adapt to the climate and nature crisis needs to create development among the poorest. The Norwegian government has set an ambitious target to double its overall climate finance and to reach $1.7 billion every year by 2026. And within that, the government aims to triple the share of climate finance that is granted for purposes of adaptation. Part of this effort is the Climate Investment Fund. Through the fund, Norway has invested $200 million in renewable projects in India. India is a global leader in so many ways, also in renewable energy. And India has an impressive track record in renewable energy and has shown leadership in solar power, in hydro, in ocean cleanup, in hydrogen, which is underway now, and now also with its G20 leadership. We, Norway, are very proud to have a close partnership with India on renewable energy. And for Norad, this has been an important part of our work and will continue to be so. And finally, dear all, these are challenging times, and we have difficult tasks ahead of us. I am an optimist by heart. I often call myself an empirical optimist, because history shows us that humanity can find solutions and move forward over and over. I hope you feel the same way, and I wish you a fruitful conference. Thank you.
I now invite
Ladies and
Mr.
gentlemen,
I now invite Mr. Manish Bapna, sir, to conclude the session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. What you've heard today quite consistently, we are at a crossroads at this point in time between two very different futures. We know finance is at the heart of actually moving towards the better future that we want. We know we need to do something quite different to transform the financial system into one that can actually provide the capital that's needed to create that zero carbon, nature positive, people first future. So as a way to conclude, what I'd like to do is turn to each of our panelists for a 240 character remark, something that we could put out on Twitter as a kind of final message that you'd like to leave the audience with. So with that, Mahendra, can I start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Manish, for the leadership. My message would be adopt sustainable lifestyle for gifting clean climate to your grandchildren.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. So, well, so Nobel laureate Amartya Sen wrote this book, Development is Freedom. So with all due respect to him, perhaps I might suggest a revision or an update on that to call it Decarbonization is Freedom.
Decarbonization is freedom. Thank you, Pradeep.
Each of us, we can become leaders of sustainability. It depends on us. We need a new global architecture of sustainability.
Each of us. Agency. Thank you.
I think you already stole my line, but I'll say it again, which is, with half of the infrastructure yet to be built, we are investing in it. So there's so much infrastructure to be built. Let's lock in resilience and not risk.
Let's lock in resilience, not risk.
Well, I think I've stated my word any which way, but still I'll repeat. I think the global financial architecture needs to socialize finance in some way, at least a part of it, for sure, or else 2030 is not on.
Socializing finance. And I'll just say as a final word, picking up on what the Director General said, something my mother once told me, pessimists are right more often, but optimists win more often. So with that, a warm round of applause to our panelists. Thank you all. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of TERI and WSDS Secretariat, we thank all the distinguished speakers for an insightful discussion. For our online participants, stay tuned, and we would request all delegates to please remain seated for the next session. The next session is a fireside chat on driving ambition and action for a sustainable future. Thank you.